Afternoon all, welcome to Oscar Sunday. And as a special Oscars treat, we've got another double bill here of the 2013 film blog. We're going to be looking right now at one of the Oscar contenders, Beasts of the Southern Wild, and then following on from that we'll be looking at Mayor Maxima Culpa and the effect that's had on the Catholic Church. So, first things first, Beasts of the Southern Wild, which I thought I had missed for good, but thanks to the good people at the Tyneside Cinema, they brought it back for me for one showing only, which I managed to catch. So I have now finally seen almost all of the Oscar contenders. The only one that I've now not seen, I've not caught Argo or Lincoln, and both I don't particularly want to either, because neither of those two films seem particularly up my street. So, Beasts of the Southern Wild, which it's a bit of a strange one, really, to see the Academy giving it a nod for Best Film. I mean, it's been a bit of a weird selection this year, given we've had both Beasts and Amour in there. I think some of the more cynical commentators might be sort of saying, is this the Academy's desperate attempt to try and prove that they have at least watched one foreign film and one indie art house film this year? I don't know. I think that's probably a bit on the harsh side, because the two films are very, very good. But it just does seem a bit strange for a film like this and Amour to have got into the best film category. But let's just hope it's the start of a new wave for the Oscars in terms of actually looking at the truly great films of the year and not just looking to see who are the biggest directors, who put something out, let's plonk them in the Oscars so we can get them along the party. So, Beasts of the Southern Wild, which is a bit of a strange old film, really. It's set in this bayou community down in the American Deep South. We think it's somewhere around Louisiana, sort of New Orleans kind of way. And what they have is this huge levee wall around the base of the state, and beyond that levee wall is a community known as the Bathtub, in which basically there's a small community of dwellers there who live this place beyond the levee wall. It's considered by most to be far too dangerous to live there because it floods, because it hasn't got the protective levee to try and help it. Obviously the levee is used to try and keep the water on their side. And sort of what we see in this community is a young girl called Hush Puppy, who is played really incredibly by a startling new young actress called Quvenzhané Wallis. And she's an interesting category in that obviously she's now up for the Best Actress Oscar. I mean, in this film, she was 5, and I think she lied about her age to get the part. So she is the youngest ever nominee for Best Actress. And obviously she's going up against Emmanuelle Riva for Amour, who is the oldest ever Best Actress Oscar winner. But obviously I wouldn't mind either of those two winning. I hope, having looked at the way the awards season has gone so far, I'm hoping that it's going to go to Emmanuelle Riva. Knowing the Academy, I think they might give it to her. The real competition is going to be from Jessica Chastain, and to be honest, Zero Dark 30 seems to not be doing all that well in the award ceremonies. I'm not seeing much coming up for that, so I think you can normally use something like the BAFTAs as a decent barometer of the kind of things, and the BAFTA went to Emmanuelle Riva, so I'm guessing that the Oscar will probably go the same way. But anyway, Quvenzhané Wallis, aged just 5, gives an extraordinary performance here as this young girl in this community, and she's living there with her father, Wink. And he's another interesting one because he was an actual Katrina survivor. And from what I understand, the producers of the film found him working in a bakery. And literally, he had to be almost prized away from his bakery to be in this film. And thinking they're making an Oscar-worthy film, and the main star is pretty much constantly concerned with how are his bread rolls getting on. So it's a really interesting little cast they got together here. So Wink and his daughter live in this sort of clearing in two trailers. One trailer for him, one trailer for her. And they live together like that. It's not really ever explained properly what happened to the mother of Hush Puppy, other than she's gone. We see her occasionally in flashback, but for the most part, accepted that she is living with her father and he is the one looking out for her. And sort of what happens is, for a few days, Wink goes away and no one's entirely sure where he is. He eventually comes back and it's pretty clear that he's been in hospital and he's got something pretty heavily wrong with him. There's an amazingly emotive scene in which he and his daughter have a huge fight and she ends up striking him on the chest, and next thing you know he's fallen down totally poleaxed, and it's clear there's something wrong with his heart and that she's not helped this. And the performance she gives after she realises what she's done and how much she's hurt her father, it's a really startling performance. It shows amazing self-awareness, because the problem you often have with children in films is that they're not believable enough. They don't feel like this is what real children are actually like. Whereas Quvenzhané Wallis here is absolutely 100%, you truly believe she is this character. And she's a truly believable child actor, which is an amazing thing to get right, particularly at the age of 5. So what sort of happens is that we learn that Wink is not well, but we also learn that on the way there is a storm coming, which obviously we, with hindsight, we all know this is Hurricane Katrina. But they don't know, all they know is that there's a huge storm coming, and a lot of people start to leave the bathtub community. But there are sort of a hardy group of souls who stay behind, determined to fight this out and continue with their lives. So when the storm hits, it's a really, really intense few scenes. But it's also one where you start to see the real bond between Wink and Hush Puppy, because at one point he goes out with his gun to try and basically calm his daughter down by shooting at the storm and to try and show that he is not afraid of what is coming. So once the storm is hit, the entire community is flooded. They sort of all have to get into these sort of handmade boats and try and sail around the community and try and find where everybody else is. Eventually Wink does find the other survivors and they all sort of live together. But the problem is that all this salt water invading their community and all this pollution is killing off all the fish, all the animals. There's no food for them. And they come up with a solution, which basically is they have to blast a hole in the wall of the levee, because that will drain the water away and give them back their community. So they do this and they get on with it, and it is blown up, and the water level does go down, but it doesn't really help. The fact is that the damage has already been done. There is no food, there is no land to grow anything on. There's nothing left for them. They can't carry on to live in this kind of situation. And it's at this point that an international relief effort arrives to try and help them, and says that they can't stay. They've got to be taken away to this hospital and looked after, because at the moment their community is just not habitable for them. And they all try and resist this because they really, really, really don't want to have to go to this Red Cross centre to be saved. But eventually they are forced away. And it's some real beautiful scenes in that you see this community and how institutionalised they are now within their own community. They can't survive in our world, but the fact is they're a part of our world, but they're beyond this levee wall. And this is the whole point of it, is that this is a community that isn't a community. They're beyond our politics, they're beyond our comprehension, and yet they are part of our world. And it's a very, very strange, very, very surreal sort of film in that respect. I mean, ultimately, they do break out of the hospital and return to the bathtub community with Wink. But obviously, Hush Puppy now realises that he is slowly dying, and so she sets out on a journey across the sea to try and find where her mother is, because obviously she now needs someone to take care of her once her father passes away. And we do find someone who we think could be her mother. It's never really confirmed whether or not it is. It's simply she is a woman who looks a lot like her mother and does show some sympathy and love for this child. But ultimately, she says that her life, she can't take care of this child. She has to send her back to her father. And sort of intertwined with this whole story, there's sort of a second substrand going on, which is all to do with these titular beasts of the title, in that we learn quite early on in one of the lessons they have, the history lessons, that there are creatures that have been frozen since the Ice Age, known as aurochs, and they are sort of like these strange porcine creatures with horns and things, and they're huge. They look like something out of Where the Wild Things Are. It's very strange, and we learn that slowly the ice is melting and the aurochs are being released. And they are released, and across the course of the film, we see these aurochs chasing across the plains, heading for the bathtub. And eventually, there's a standoff between Hush Puppy and the aurochs, which are obviously symbolic of her fears, her nightmares, that are finally catching up with her. And the fact is that she's been turned down by this person who might be her mother. Her father's dying, she has nothing left, and yet she turns and she faces the aurochs, and she actually learns that they're friendly. And the fact is that it's a beautiful little framing device in terms of her fears and nightmares and where they're coming from, and the fact is that everything comes to a head at this one point. Now, the question has to be in terms of whether or not do we class this film as being a worthy contender for best film, which is, it's an interesting question. It's undoubtedly, it's a beautiful little piece of filmmaking, and done on a total shoestring budget. It's just, at times, it is staggeringly beautiful, staggeringly well made, because the plot itself is fairly straightforward. It's just this community who get flooded, and within that there is this daughter and her father, and it's about the loss and grief and moving on. And it's about this community who's completely cut off from the rest of society, in that we have to accept that these people potentially do really exist. There is a real community like that is literally beyond the wall, that we try and not see. And the fact is, the only help they're ever given is to forcibly remove them from the one thing that makes them unique, makes them themselves. So it is a really beautiful little film. Whether I would say it should be getting best film ahead of Amour, no, I don't think it does. I think Amour is, of those films that have been selected, obviously, as I say, I've not seen Link and I haven't seen Argo, but of the others that almost I have seen, without a doubt, Amour is the best. I would say that Beasts is a very good second place, and it's a very, very worthwhile film going to watch. But I don't think that it's quite in the same category as Amour was. You didn't leave, like with Amour, your emotions totally shredded in the same way as you did with Les Mis as well. You sort of left that film in emotional tatters. So that this film is very, very different. The ending to this feels a lot more resolute, a lot more upbeat, even though everything's happened. It does make you leave feeling a pride in the human spirit that can overcome such things. But ultimately, I think it's one of those films that if you get a chance to watch it, I think you really should, because it is a masterclass at times in what it reminded me most of. Is anybody who watched Andrea Arnold's film Fish Tank a few years ago, because the main performance in that, again, was an extraordinary performance from somebody who was not a trained actor. It was just somebody who Andrea Arnold had found on a station, having a row with a boyfriend. In the same way, the performances here by Quvenzhané Wallis and Dwight Henry as Wink, they're amazingly natural performances. They're completely... because these people are professional actors. One's only 5 years old, for goodness sake. And yet, they are performances of such grace and maturity that anybody who played those roles, who was one of the Hollywood darlings, would be probably up and coming up against Daniel Day-Lewis for Lincoln. Because the performances they give, as proven by the fact that Quvenzhané Wallis is up for Best Actress, they're incredible. And it's a beautiful film that is so well worth watching. And all I can say to you is, if you do get the chance, because I thought my chance had gone, thankfully it hadn't. If you do get the opportunity, just go and watch it and really, really enjoy it, because it is a beautiful little film. It's unlike a lot of films lately. It is not too long, it doesn't force itself, and you'll leave it just feeling a bit, if not uplifted, you'll feel that you've certainly been to an event, and that it is very, very different to a lot of other films out there, and it's well worth a watch, so have a go. And obviously we'll see how it does tonight at the Oscars. Good night.